Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me for the Swahili Virtual Pre-Departure Orientation. My name is Bo Knutson and I am the Program Officer for Swahili, Portuguese, and Turkic languages for the CLS program. I want to start off by saying congratulations again on receiving a U.S. Department of State CLS scholarship. This is an amazing opportunity for you to devote 2 full months to rapidly increasing your proficiency in Swahili and gaining firsthand understanding of Tanzanian culture and East African culture. As a CLS participant this summer, you will live with a host family, attend classes daily, participate in cultural excursions designed to reinforce your language skills, and commit yourself to speaking only Swahili in most settings. The program is designed to challenge you and to allow you as much time as possible to increase your language proficiency in a very short period of time. I encourage you to take notes during this presentation, as some questions may arise that you may want to follow up on with me. You may just call me or send me an email and we can talk anything through that you might want to chat about or to clarify. The information here is going to overlap a lot with the information that you received in the CLS Swahili handbook as a PDF from me. But certainly, we might be giving some new information and discussing things in a little more detail or more candidly. So please take notes if that will be useful for you. Our VPDO today starts with overview. We're going to go through 4 key areas that will help you to start preparing for your summer in Tanzania. These include basic information like who, what, where, when of the CLS program, language learning in Tanzania at the host institution, MSTCDC, and cultural differences, namely how they appear in the host family and how you might interact with them in everyday life in Tanzania and in the conversations you have with Tanzanians. You already received a very detailed pre-departure handbook, and that had a lot of information in there on how to prepare for your summer program, including a packing list and recommendations for what to bring and what clothes to pack. We're going to go through some of that here. We'll be speaking more generally in this webinar, in this VPDO, about how to prepare for the CLS Swahili program. We'll go over topics such as independent travel, what to bring, health and safety, and other important topics too. First off, I want to reintroduce you to a couple players on the DC side of the CLS program. On the top right corner is Jeanette Owen. These faces might be familiar to you. You might have recognized them from the first VPDO. Jeanette has worked with outbound language programs her entire professional career and has worked with CLS since 2009. She has a background in Russian studies and linguistics. You'll be meeting her at the pre-departure orientation in Washington, DC. And on the bottom, that's me, Bo. You might know me from email announcements, asking you for things, and our recent communication by phone. I'll be meeting you in person at the at the pre-departure orientation in Washington as well, and we'll have site-specific orientation sessions. I'm also available at any time during the PDO to talk anything through with you that's on your mind, or beforehand by phone and email. I began work with the CLS program as a resident director in Ufa, Russia in 2010. I've also more recently worked as a resident director in the Republic of Georgia for CLS Russian, and I've worked as recruitment and selection officer for CLS program for a couple of years as well in between those 2 RD gigs. I'll be working very closely with your on-site resident directors and the Institute staff in Arusha, in Usa River, to stay informed about the program, respond to inquiries, and help resolve any issues that arise. I can note now that I'm your main contact when you are here in the United States. As soon as you get on that plane and arrive to Arusha Airport, you will meet your resident director, and she will become your main contact. You will still correspond with me about things like waiver forms and return travel dates, but for all other issues and concerns and things, you'll interact most directly with your resident director. So I'd like to introduce your resident director to you for the summer 2019 program. Her name is Jessica Klink. Jessica is a returned Peace Corps volunteer who served in southern Tanzania between 2016 and 17. She was a community health and development volunteer with the Peace Corps, and she has a background in social work and has worked on a number of social programs supporting people, and is currently working on a master's in public health and teaching preschool. She loves speaking Swahili and learning new vocabulary, communicating with new people, and picking up slang, exploring pop culture. In her free time, Jessica loves playing tennis and taking hikes with her dog, Jeffrey, who you see in the picture. Jessica has also more recently gotten experience doing social work, doing case management for refugees in Chicago, where she was able to apply her Swahili language skills. Jessica will meet you at the airport in Arusha and will be your point person at any time during the CLS Swahili program to help you through any issues you're encountering or help you with logistical things. So she looks forward to meeting you, speaking Swahili with you. I'd like to talk about the academic program in general at our partner institution in Usa River, Tanzania. You might see online on our website the CLS Swahili program being listed as being in Arusha, Tanzania. Arusha is a large city, and it's a sort of a cosmopolitan, bigger city. Our site actually is in Usa River. Usa River is 20 kilometers from Arusha, and it is a smaller community where there are many benefits to being in Usa River and not in Arusha. It's a much calmer environment. It's a much purer environment linguistically. There's not a lot of English in Usa River. This is the home to MSTCDC, or MS Training Center for Development and Cooperation. One thing I can note generally about language courses in Tanzania is that they are not going to be your sole source of new Swahili vocabulary and of Swahili language practice. Many of you are coming from classrooms where the only place you have been speaking Swahili is in the classroom. But in Tanzania, you will have formal study in the classroom and informal study and a lot of knowledge you'll be picking up passively and actively outside of the classroom. You might find that at MSTCDC, you are covering content that seems like very familiar to you and you might already be familiar with. In general, we ask for your patience because CLS participants are coming from many different backgrounds, and there will be content that you will see in the classroom and here in the classroom that will be familiar to you and might be repetition. But we ask you to keep in mind that language study overseas taught by native speakers is a very different experience than a US classroom and will offer new opportunities. Even if it is a review for you, we ask you to keep an open mind and to be patient. For those studying overseas for the first time, the classroom will play a very different role because it will not be your sole source of new Swahili vocabulary and grammatical structures. You'll be exposed to unfamiliar vocabulary, new expressions, and grammatical structures outside in Usa River and in Arusha. And so we ask you really to try to concentrate on formal aspects and learning in the classroom and then bring those to your extracurricular time outside the classroom and apply it, and then also bring back things you've learned and heard from your time outside of the classroom to the language classes. So really we want to preface the academic slides with this because we want you to have realistic expectations on how to prepare your language learning experience so you can make the most of both the classroom experience and then the experiences you'll be having outside of the classroom. So MSTCDC is a Danish-founded center focused on training local leaders in development and education. The Swahili department exists because MSTCDC staff recognized that Swahili was a key tool for learning how to do development work in Swahili and in training visitors and foreigners who are working in Tanzania, but then also being able to conduct trainings for Tanzanians themselves in education and then also in development practices. The academic program at MSTCDC will begin when you arrive with a language placement test. This placement test will be used to initially divide you into groups, but teachers may recommend changes in the first couple weeks after they get to know you a little bit better and hear your Swahili. Please be aware that while everyone applied at a certain level, either advanced beginning, intermediate, or advanced level, or beginner, this does not determine your placement. Many of you have been studying Swahili since you applied for CLS program, and others of you might test at a different level than the level at which you applied for. Likewise, everyone took an OPI, but this does not determine your placement level in Usa River. Each week you will attend 20 hours of classroom instruction, Your classroom instruction will be supplemented by 3 one-hour sessions with language partners each week. MSTCDC has planned various half-day, full-day, and overnight cultural excursions and activities which are designed to expose you to different aspects of Tanzanian life, the diversity of cultures and communities, and of course to give you new contexts in which to practice your language skills. You'll receive more details about these excursions and activities once you're in country. Cultural excursions and trips will both occur during the week and on the weekend. Please note that 2 to 3 weekends will most likely be left open and free for independent travel that you may do in country. However, we do encourage students not to make plans ahead of time for specific weekends, as dates for those weekend excursions and trips are not finalized and are subject to change. MSTCDC is a fully equipped campus with a number of resources that you'll have access to. These include a gym, computers, a library, Wi-Fi, and laundry services. Please be aware that Wi-Fi is a luxury in Usa River and at MSTCDC, and you shouldn't expect it to be fast Wi-Fi like you might have on your home campus. Anytime you're on the campus at MSTCDC, you'll be speaking Swahili and you'll have to adhere to the language policy. Before participating in the CLS program, you should understand the CLS program doesn't aim to recreate an American-style classroom experience for you overseas. If that were the goal, we could just hold the program in the United States with native speakers who would be teaching the courses, much like the Foreign Service Institute for the State Department. A big part of the CLS program model is providing students with opportunities to adapt to cultural differences and different ways of doing things overseas in an academic setting, and classes are the prime example of this. So here are some tips and considerations for you as you think about your academic program in Tanzania. Instruction tends to be more formal. Education on the whole tends to be more formal in Tanzania than what you may be used to in the United States. This is apparent in the way teachers in Tanzania interact with their students in the classroom and in how students address their teachers, such as Mwalimu so-and-so, Mwalimu Omar, Mwalimu Yusta, and also in dress of students, and also in the way teachers address students. That being said, teachers at TCDC have worked with students from around the world, and depending on the sorts of training and exposures teachers have had to other teaching methods, you will find a variety of teaching styles among your different teachers that you encounter at MSTCDC. Regardless, keep in mind that your teachers are experts in Swahili and in Swahili instruction. So be mindful and respectful of this and be patient with them as you go through the initial weeks. You should dress nicely on campus and lead more towards business casual. Don't wear revealing clothing. Long pants and skirts are best. Don't wear flip-flops to MSTCDC and try to wear closed-toed shoes only. You should speak only Swahili during courses at MSTCDC and anywhere on campus. Again, this is not only following the language policy and showing respect to your instructors, it's an essential way to signal to the teachers that you're making an effort and adhering to the program policy, which they also have to uphold. You shouldn't eat or use your cell phone in class. You may drink water, but no other liquids or foods during classroom hours are permitted, except during break time. You can keep it with you, but keep it off your desk and in your bag. You should turn off your cell phones during class, and just so that the classroom is not interrupted by phone calls. Do everything you can do to limit distractions. You should be on time to class and request to be excused if you need to use the restroom. If you find that you are tardy to class, knock on the classroom door before entering, apologize to the teacher, and request to enter. Likewise, if you need to use the bathroom or step out for any reason, raise your hand and request permission to excuse yourself. You'll learn more formal ways of making requests like this when you arrive in country. You shouldn't engage in heated discussion or talk or contentious conversation in class. If you disagree with something that a classmate or a teacher has said or someone's behavior in class, please privately share this after the class with your resident director or the academic director. Disagreements like this might be more common in a US classroom in which we're used to having a debate sometimes, or we're more open to debating things in a discussion-based classroom. But in Tanzania, this isn't always the case, and so this might be a distraction and a concern for teachers if it happens. In general, we ask that you participate in the class very actively. You should raise your hand to answer questions, and you shouldn't be afraid to ask questions if you don't understand something. By doing this, you take ownership of the learning experience. and you'll make more progress with your language skills. And you'll create opportunities to learn from native speakers and teachers who know this language very well, but they don't necessarily know what you don't understand. So being clear about what you might need help with and speaking up is going to be key for you. You'll have language partners on the CLS program. Your sessions with language partners are meant to supplement the classroom learning experience by providing you an informal opportunity to intentionally practice and reinforce what you're learning in the classroom with a native speaker and learn new vocabulary. Most language teachers are most language partners are community members or students. You're going to participate in an activity fair in the beginning of the program during the first weekend with language partners in order to get to know them. And during that time, you'll be matched with your language partner. You will meet 3 times a week for 1 hour each session. Although if you're falling behind during the week on that 3-hour target, your language partner, you and your language partner might meet for 2 hours in order just to complete that 3-hour requirement during the week. You should keep in mind that language partners may not have a lot of disposable income. And so when you're inviting them to do things, try to do things that aren't going to cost them a lot of money. If you go out to get tea, you can offer to pay for the tea for your language partner or feel them out to see what they're comfortable doing. You'll receive also you will have received a living stipend in Tanzania. And so going out and having tea or getting soft drinks or something or coffee will be a great way of using that stipend in order to break the ice with your language partner and get off on the right foot. You'll be using your target language to do everything in Tanzania. Ordering food in a restaurant, making travel arrangements, asking for directions. All of these are going to be opportunities for you to learn more phrases, expressions, and you can bring these to your language partner to practice. You should be writing down these expressions as you hear them, even if you don't understand what they mean at first. And the language partner sessions are a great time to clarify information. Despite the challenge of being in a multilingual environment, we want to add that being overseas is simply not enough. You're going to have to really be active in learning the language and to take concrete steps to increasing your proficiency. We want to remind you that the language policy is mandatory and you will need to follow it. Your RD will listen to you during classroom hours to understand that you're following the policy and speaking Swahili. We'll also communicate to you in Swahili. But this is really something that you'll need to be supportive of with one another, with your peers on CLS Swahili. So speak Swahili with them. Don't pepper your phrases with English, or don't pepper your speech with English phrases. This can be really problematic, and it can be sort of a crutch. You should really try to speak completely in Swahili with your peers, your American CLS peers. This might seem awkward at first, but you need to kind of cross that threshold and get into the habit of speaking Swahili with Americans who might have different levels than you have. By doing this, you will be supportive of one another. If you end up using English excessively or here and there during your speech with other CLS participants, you're sort of switching back and forth, and this can really kind of disrupt the immersion environment. So please keep that in mind as your own program. We have some tips in general for you and for language learning. One is, like I mentioned, to keep a notepad with you at all times to write down new vocabulary. You're going to be overwhelmed by new vocabulary in Tanzania, so just jot down a phrase or an expression or a word if you don't understand it, and you might have time later to follow up on it. You might only be able to write it down the second or third time you hear it, but if you get it down, you'll be able to identify what it is, and maybe on the 4th or 5th time you hear it, you'll be able to understand it in its context. Listen actively to how native speakers will rephrase things back to you. This happens subtly. Tanzanians won't want to overtly contradict you and tell you you're speaking poorly or wrongly, or phrasing something in an incorrect way. What they'll do is they'll rephrase it back to you. So try to be attentive to that, and so that you can make adjustments as you are speaking. You should rely on your language partner to practice things you're learning in the classroom. We mentioned this before, but starting out and kind of talking through what you're learning in the classroom with your language partner will be key. In general, you should also come to your language partner sessions prepared to talk about topics and to talk about your own interests. You'll bring pictures from America of your friends and family, and you can show those to your language partner and talk about them and ask about their family. Also, you should be prepared to share your interests with them. What sorts of hobbies do you have or activities do you enjoy doing? This can lead you to do things together and break the ice so that you're not having the same conversation over and over again. In Arusha, you'll have an opportunity to buy a small dictionary or a grammar text at bookstores. But if you have any of those before the program, bring them and keep them with you in your bag. They can be really helpful when you're out in the community and you want to find a word or look up something that you hear. As a CLS participant, you're going to be incredibly busy all summer. We say that CLS is an intensive program, and we really mean it. It's also an intensive cultural immersion program, which means that you'll be participating in activities and busy all day, and that your free time in the evenings won't necessarily be the same type of free time that you have in the United States. So here's a sample schedule what a typical day will look like. Schedules may vary, but we wanted to give you an idea of how little free time you'll have. The majority of your time in Tanzania is going to be very structured, so it's important that you're prepared for this. You should think of CLS as a job. In addition to the classroom, expect around 2 hours of homework per night. Curfew will be at 10 p.m. on weeknights and 12 a.m. on weekends. There will be half day, full day, and overnight cultural excursions, which will be mandatory. You'll be provided more details on various cultural excursions at the pre-departure orientation in Washington and when you'll be in country during your in-country orientation. In the evening, you will have time to do homework, but you should also be expected to spend time with your host family. This may be at home, or they may want to go out to eat in town, or explore the city, or go to some friends as guests. I really want to emphasize that even when you have no scheduled CLS activity, it may not mean that you're getting enough time for yourself to sit alone in your room. Family culture in Tanzania is very communal, so your host family will want to invite you to things. If you need free time alone to do homework or to decompress, you should be prepared to speak up to your host family and tell them that you're okay, but you just need an hour or two in the evenings to decompress because you're very busy. You should be prepared to explain this in Swahili and to also explain it in a friendly way so that the host family doesn't feel offended or worry that something is wrong. The main purpose of host families is to provide you with an authentic cultural and linguistic experience. You're going to gain a whole new set of vocabulary, hear people of different ages, backgrounds, and education levels speak the target language, develop personal connections with members of your host family, and learn about their lives. It's a very exciting and valuable experience, one which alumni of the program are constantly cite as one of the things that they got the most out of from the CLS experience. But it's not without its challenges. Host families are recruited and trained prior to the CLS program. They're provided information about the CLS program. In the beginning of the process, they understand what you're doing in Tanzania, what your goals are, and what's expected of you, and what's expected of them. Many of them will have hosted before, and if they haven't, they've probably talked it through with host families who have hosted before, and they will have gone through the host family orientation. They understand that you're coming to Tanzania to only speak Swahili, and they don't expect you to speak English. They also don't expect you to speak fluently from the get-go. So don't worry if you've never been overseas or are a novice Swahili speaker, that's fine. Your host family will adjust for you. Here are your expectations that you can have of host families. They'll provide you 2 meals a day, breakfast and dinner during the week, and 3 meals on the weekends. Lunch on class days will be provided at TCDC. You'll be able to use your stipend to go to a cafe to get some lunch or a cafeteria. You will be provided a private room which you'll share with another CLS participant in your host family. You'll be provided bed sheets, pillows, and blankets, but you should bring your own towel. A key to the host family's apartment or house will be provided for you so you can come and go. And the location and transportation and your host family will be able to talk through where the host family's house will be. They'll be able to help you understand transportation routes and how to get to and from school. Host families will be placed at various distances from the school. Some students will be able to walk. Others will be dropped off by their host family or sometimes take a taxi or public transport. Students are advised only to use the taxi list provided by MSTCDC. And in general, you should communicate with your RD as you're working out your transportation route during the first couple of weeks, just to let them know that you're working it out or if you have any concerns or questions. Any potential visits to host families by friends of yours or other CLS participants must be cleared ahead of time with the host family, at least like 1 day before. Students shouldn't expect to be able to have overnight guests with their host families. and they shouldn't surprise host families with guests during meal times. Host families will want to prepare food for guests, and so if you bring a guest on a host family, they might be agitated, or they might not have enough food to provide for that guest at hand or ready. You're responsible for washing your own clothes and keeping your room clean in the host family. This goes a really long way to show respect to the host family, and to show them that you're able to live with them and that you don't need their help. If they see that your room is really messy, or that your clothes are dirty and are piling up, they might go ahead and clean it for you. This creates an awkward dynamic, so you should be proactive about keeping a tidy living area, and also keeping up on washing your clothes. Keep in mind that every host family is going to be different. Host families vary in terms of socioeconomic background, how religious they are, their family structure, their schedules, and they may have very different diets and things that they cook for meals each night. Some host families may eat more meat, others may have a more vegetable-based diet. It's best not to compare host families to one another with different CLS peers host families. Regardless of how host families differ, each one will be unique and have unique things to offer to participants, and will offer opportunities to practice and hone your language skills. Many participants forge connections that last beyond the CLS program with their host family and develop close bonds. This doesn't always happen, but regardless of whether it does, you're going to have unique access and perspective into everyday life of Tanzanian families. We're going to go over food in more depth in later slides, but please remember, while living with your host family, you will eat on their schedule, and you will eat typical Tanzanian food. Some general things to note about the food that you'll get. You will not have the same variety in meals and food choices that you have in the States. You should expect starchy foods, vegetables to be cooked down, and generous use of oil. For breakfast, many families prefer small pastry-like goodies with tea, cookies, porridge, milk, coffee, or juice. For lunch and dinner, families prefer rice or ugali as a starch with beans, meat, or fish, and sometimes cooked green vegetables. Dinner is served typically later in the evening, between 8 and 10 p.m. For the most part, it is considered disrespectful to refuse food outright offered to you, unless you're sick or have a stomach issue, in which case you should explain, politely decline, and say that you are not hungry. If it's food that looks like something you wouldn't like or you have concerns about, you don't have to eat it. If you don't have any concerns about the food as far as allergies or your ability to eat it, you should try a little bit to be polite and then leave the rest. Host families are aware of dietary restrictions that you have. They've been prefaced by this in advance, and your RD also knows. So there shouldn't be too much confusion related to diet. If there is, simply talk to your RD and they'll be able to help you work it out. They might give you vocabulary to use to talk to your host family, or if it's something more serious related to an allergy, they could also make a phone call themselves or talk to MSTCDC, who could make a phone call. As a final note, the change in diet can be quite difficult for some students, and you will most likely miss or crave foods from the United States that you won't have in Tanzania. Do your best to adjust to and embrace the eating culture in Tanzania and in your host family. You will definitely find things that you enjoy to eat. If there are serious issues with health or stomach issues that you encounter while in country, let your resident director know as soon as possible and communicate this with your host family. Don't be shy of talking about digestive issues like diarrhea or other things that come up. Being candid about that is very helpful, because it can hasten your trip to the clinic where you can get stomach medication to address what's going on. You may experience cultural differences in the form of personal space and privacy in Tanzania, especially while living with host families. If there are kids in your host family, they will most likely be curious and touchy with your things. You should be prepared for this. Living with a host family while navigating cultural differences and adapting to new eating habits, routines, is a challenge in and of itself. It might be particularly difficult for us who are used to a lot of independence or time alone in the United States. While we fully recognize the importance of having time to yourself and to process your experience in order to stay emotionally healthy, we encourage you to keep in mind that outside of the classroom, the time you spend and interact with your host family will be very valuable opportunities to gain cultural and linguistic immersion experiences. And so in general, we advise you to say yes to new experiences. If you have concerns about this, about not having any free time to decompress, you can always talk to your RD about it and also mention it to your host family. This is part of the process of them getting to know you. You might begin thinking about how you'll navigate cultural differences while you're living overseas to your host families, and how you'll have a lesser degree of independence. In general, self-expression can also be limited in Tanzania, simply for the fact that you don't have the language skills necessarily to share every aspect of your identity and who you are. Additionally, you might find that due to cultural differences, you might be more limited in terms of what you can express and what topics of conversation might be appropriate in Tanzania. Tanzanians in general are more conservative as a culture broadly than US culture. So you should keep that in mind as you talk about yourself and your life. You should also keep in mind that there are laws in Tanzania that might impact the topics of conversation you choose. There are actually, we cover this in the handbook, but there are laws that outlaw and criminalize LGBT behaviors and homosexuality in Tanzania. So regardless of what your host family's opinions are on LGBT issues and homosexuality, this might be a difficult or sort of tense topic for them to discuss with you simply because of the illegality. So we encourage you to be very cautious and avoid talking about these in the initial period with your host family. Gift giving is very important in Tanzania, and you should think about this before you leave for PDO in Washington, D.C. We advise you to bring small small souvenirs from your local community in the United States or from a near city. Things like refrigerator magnets or postcard sets might seem inconsequential or small, but your host family will really value these as they represent something from your community in a way that and provide a window into your life as a student. Sometimes other things like foods that might be specific to your region in the United States can be a really good idea, like Old Bay seasoning if you're from the Mid-Atlantic, or maple syrup if you're from New England states. So try to identify some of those things that you can bring with you and give to your host family and your teachers, and possibly also your language partner. As I mentioned, Tanzania is a more conservative country than the United States in many ways. You'll see this play out in different ways, from more traditional gender norms to the way women and men dress, to taboo topics of conversation and opinions on social issues. Be mindful of this as you navigate everyday life, and also as you make choices like how to dress or how to interact with your host family. Perceptions of time vastly differ than in Tanzania than they do in the United States. Prepare for looser adherence to schedules and planning. Tanzanians might be a little bit late to meetings if you have arranged a meeting. If you're going somewhere using public transportation, you should expect to be a little bit late sometimes and not stress out about it. Or if you're planning on going somewhere with your host family, they may be a little bit late, or you might be running a little bit late, spending time with your host family if you're coming back home, or if you have other things scheduled for that evening. So be aware of this and don't stress out about it. Tanzanians will notice if you stress out about time, and they also might get a little bit agitated if they see that you're unhappy. The exception to this will be MSTCDC, because they are an academic institution that runs on a tighter time schedule, and they have to adhere to lesson times. And they have a lot of experience also working with foreigners, and they understand these cultural differences. Your classes should start at regularly scheduled times. And also, this is something your language partners have been asked to keep in mind. They should be on time for meetings. However, if they're running late, don't blame them or stress out too much. Simply try to get in touch with your cell phone with them, or send them a text message to get an idea of if they're on their way or how close they are. Hospitality in Tanzania is very, very important. You're going to find that Tanzanians will greet each other out in public, even if they don't know you. And you might get invited in as a house guest to homes from people who you don't know very well, or they might invite you to join them to attend church or to go to other outings. If your time and availability allows for this, we recommend that you say yes to these experiences and try them out. It's going to give you a lot of new experiences and give you new opportunities to learn about new cultural differences and cultural insights that you wouldn't normally have access to. Greetings are very important. So If someone greets you on the street that you know, stop and take time to talk to them and greet them back. This might mean only a 30-second to 1-minute conversation, but if you're in a rush and you rush by someone, this could give them an impression that you're angry at them, or that that they might have done something wrong. This is a little bit different than it is in the United States. So don't be in too much of a hurry, and be sure to stop and greet and take your time in communication with people who you know when you see them out in public. You should use your right hand to receive things in Tanzania, and also when you're receiving food at meals. Public displays of affection are not appropriate in Tanzania. You won't see them that commonly in Tanzania, and you also should not do it as well when out in public. You might see people walking arm in arm. This is more of like just a behavioral norm. It's not like PDA as we understand it in the States. You might be, if you're out in the street, especially in Arusha, you might be followed by some kids sometimes and asked for money. You're going to attract attention as a foreigner in Tanzania, and you should really try to be aware of this and not be threatened or freaked out by it. It will happen. As a foreigner, you're going to attract more attention, and some of it will be innocuous. Other times it will be unwanted or irritating. The extent to which you draw attention will depend on a lot of things, including your background, how you look, whether you're walking in a group or not. You'll likely hear Mzungu, Mzungu called at you in towns, especially from children. This is pretty innocuous. You can respond with humor sometimes. Sometimes if you talk back and say hello, this can lead to giggles or surprise, or even a fun conversation. But you should use discretion in terms of whether you engage or not. It's okay to firmly say no to people who ask you for money. We're going to go through more strategies in handling this type of situations in country orientation, and some of the content in the sexual harassment webinar is relevant for this, but don't be afraid to firmly say no and get out of the situation. Please remember that your resident director supports you, and if you experience any discomfort out in public or feel threatened or violated, don't hesitate to talk about it with your RD. You should expect a lot of starchy foods and vegetables to be cooked, and vegetables to be cooked down. But starchy foods, you'll have a lot of rice, ugali, and chapatis that you'll have in your regular diet. And more often than not, food can be a little bit oily compared to food in the US. And this can be hard to, digestively speaking, to adjust to, particularly if you're used to fresh salads or steamed vegetables in the United States. You shouldn't expect the same variety in meals that you're used to in the United States, and you should expect to eat similar meals each day. Breakfast is typically chai and some sort of pastry. At lunch and dinner, you'll have heartier meals. Snacking is not so common between meals. If you need to snack, you should have these handy for yourself and keep them in your bag. Do not sniff your food before eating it unless you're cooking in the kitchen, or don't examine it really closely if you're served something. This is regarded as impolite. Try not to refuse food outright if it's served to you. This is considered polite. As I said, if you have a stomach issue, just explain it and politely decline the food. It's fine to leave food on your plate. This signals that you don't want any more served to you. You don't want another portion. But in general, we advise you to embrace the eating culture in Tanzania. This shows gratitude to your host family. Electricity and power issues are common in Usa River, so you should bring a headlamp or a small flashlight with you. You'll hear complaints from your host family and other people in Usa River about TANESCO. That's the Tanzanian Electric Supply Company. They're notorious for shutting off electricity without notice for extended periods of time, and sometimes at very inconvenient times. The frequency and duration of outages depends on the area of Usa River that you're in. MSTCDC has a generator that they use in case of power outages, but not all host families have generators. And other places that you visit in town might also just run out of electricity at unexpected times. Many roads leading off the main road in Usa River are not paved or are poorly paved. And so this means that transport between seemingly short distances will take longer than expected. It might also mean that drivers with different kinds of cars might drive at different speeds. And as we'll cover a little bit later, pedestrians do not have the right of way in Tanzania in many cities, so you should be very mindful of that and of public safety when you're out walking along roads. It will be common for you to walk along roads to get from one part of the neighborhood, one neighborhood to another in Usa River. But you should be patient and attentive and practice situational awareness. In general, if you are patient and keep an open mind as you navigate cultural differences and unfamiliar ways of life, you'll have a positive overall experience. So just try to take a breath and calm down and realize that these are cultural differences, and sometimes we just need to call on our reserves of patience and open-mindedness. The most important thing to keep in mind in Tanzania is to be about what to wear, is to be mindful of the fact that it's going to be colder in wintertime in Tanzania in general. Winters will not be as cold in general as some of the weathers that we're used to in the wintertime in many parts of the United States. However, it will be chilly at night, and there might be more rain than you expect. And also, the conservativeness of Tanzanian culture also impacts what you're going to wear out in public. You should bring sweaters or sweatshirts. You should bring long sleeve shirts, rain jackets, and shoes for rain and mud. You should also bring sweatpants for the evening and in the evening when you go to bed. When on campus, as we said, you should wear closed-toed shoes and lean more towards business casual. Keep your shoulders and knees covered. Women should avoid anything above the knee as far as skirts and blouses, or anything overly revealing, tight, or sheer clothing. Women should also wear sleeves on their blouses. Men should also wear sleeves on their shirts and wear long pants or shorts that go down to the knee. It's important that you maintain your physical and mental health while abroad on the CLS program. Living in a foreign country and participating in an intensive language program can be exhausting, so it's particularly important that you take care of yourself. It's very common for CLS participants to get sick while in country. And your body is adjusting to a new environment, and there be new bacteria in the food that will not be bad for you, but simply you'll just need to adjust to. To cut down on the probability or frequency of illness, it's recommended that when you're in Tanzania, you only drink bottled water. Additionally, you should avoid raw fruits and vegetables if you haven't washed them. Generally, we advise that you avoid eating street food that has been sitting out in the sun or that looks like it might be unsanitary. However, despite all of your best efforts, every CLS participant will get sick at least once when they're in Tanzania. So you should be prepared for this and bring over-the-counter medication or be prepared for a possible visit to the clinic. In addition, you should also be prepared for limited internet access and slow download speeds and electrical issues. You shouldn't overload sockets with electrical products that might overheat them or overload them. If you have any concerns about this, just look at the wattage on the back of your electric razor, for example. Your hairdryer in the United States will not work in a Tanzanian socket. You should be aware of that. You should also be really aware of road safety. We talked about this briefly before, but in general, Tanzanian drivers don't always believe that pedestrians have the right of way. They might be in a hurry, or they might be moving through an intersection without regard for pedestrians. We also recommend that you use taxis only recommended by MSTCDC. And in general, your in-country orientation will give you a lot more specific information about this, like phone numbers for taxi agencies they recommend, or what areas of the city to avoid, for example. They'll also have important information about going into Arusha. Usa River in general is a much safer community than Arusha. Arusha is a bigger city, and so as with any big city, there's more crime, and there's more possibilities that something can go wrong. Also, as we said, generally expect cooler temperatures than what you might expect in Tanzania over the summer. Keep in mind it'll be winter, and that you might need a couple of long sleeve shirts in case you are washing one and it's drying on the rack. So your Tanzanian visa will be good for 3 months. It will begin from the time that you enter Tanzania, and it will last for 3 months after that date. It's a multiple entry visa. Some of you have opted to waive your return flight with CLS and travel in country on your own. If you choose to do this, I'll ask that you share your travel itinerary, how you will leave Tanzania and get back to the United States with me in advance of your waiver. Additionally, if you want to change your return ticket, you'll have to do so yourself in country after you get to Tanzania. We're not able to assist you in this, but we can set the general expectation that it will take at least a half hour, probably 2 or 3 times that period of time, for you to wait on hold with United Airlines to change your ticket. And you might need to pay a fee to do that too. If you do that, you'll need to notify me of the date you return your ticket, and you'll need to return to the United States within the 90-day period so that you don't violate the visa that MSTCDC has issued you. If you do that, then you're putting them as a inviting partner for CLS students in jeopardy. What's next for you in the month that we have before you arrive to DC? Well, you're going to receive a stipend check this month. That stipend check is going to cover any incidentals that'll get you to and from the airport where you're flying to Washington, D.C. That stipend check covers any incidentals that you'll have en route, any meals that you might need to get in Washington, D.C. Or at the airport. It will also cover your cultural adaptation in Tanzania. So it's money that's designed to help you engage more with the culture. If this means buying tickets to a performance or a movie, or, as we said, getting tea or small food with your language partner, then you're putting those funds to use in a good way. There's no reporting on how you use these funds with the stipend. They simply are issued to each student. You should have received your travel itinerary already for Washington, D.C. for pre-departure orientation. The PDO starts on June 9th. That's the day you'll arrive. And you'll check into the hotel, and there'll be a short reception in the evening that you should attend. The full day of PDO orientation will occur on the 10th. That's going to be a day that will be jam-packed with sessions. We're also going to be having Indonesian and Persian students from CLS groups during that orientation too that will be joining us. I'll be meeting with you separately to talk about site-specific orientation as well towards the end of the day. On the following day, on the 11th, you'll depart for Arusha. Your flight will be through Amsterdam. You won't have any time to leave the airport. Expect to arrive in Arusha on the following day, June 12th. You'll be met at the Arusha airport by Institute staff and by your RD. And from that point on, the program will begin. You'll have an in-country orientation, a language placement test. You will receive a cell phone that will be a simple burner-type block phone and a SIM card. Those phones will not be very high-tech. There won't be great cameras on them, if any camera, but it will be an essential tool for you to keep in touch with your RD, to text them, text your host family if you're running late for a meal, and use in emergencies. The benefit of these burner phones is that the batteries last a very long time, so you won't find yourself in the situation that's common for smartphone users of being out and about in the city and your phone running low on batteries. Please remember, you should bring business casual outfit to PDO. We'll have a guest, a representative from the U.S. Department of State who will be talking to us, and we want to be wearing business casual for that to reflect professionalism. And we also ask that you don't plan errands for Washington, D.C. For those very short 2.5 or more like 2 days that you'll be 2 full days you'll actually be in Washington, D.C. You should plan on being busy the entire time. You may have some time in the evenings to decompress, but we will be giving you small assignments and tasks that we'll ask you to do in the evening in the hotel room, so you won't have time to really get out and about in Washington. That brings us to the end of our pre-departure, virtual pre-departure orientation. I do encourage you to be in touch with me with any questions that came up in your mind during this video. And I also would refer you back to your CLS program handbook. There's a lot of information in there that's really very useful and that we'll have opportunities to expand on in our conversations during the PDO in Washington, D.C. in just less than a month. I want to thank you for your attention, and I'm excited to work with you on the program. We're really very lucky to have a diverse group of students with us this year, and we are very excited for all the opportunities you're going to have this summer at MSTCDC. And I can speak on behalf of our Institute staff that they are also very excited to meet you when you arrive. On behalf of the CLS program, thanks for sticking through to the end of this VPDO, and we will see you in Washington, D.C. Bye-bye.